So to get started, my name is Rich Heido, and I am the clinical director and just one of the administrative team with SFP. I know some of you have seen me in classes, some of you have not thus far, but you'll see me around this semester. So what we're going to do today is go through a really brief introduction to mental health and the clinical component of the SFP program. So to get started, I know some of you have potentially had FAMS or Social Work 3000, and some haven't. So when you think about the Stronger Families Project and you think about mental health, what's the first thing that typically comes to mind? Because we're an education-based program, right? But what's the first thing that comes to mind?
I don't know. I think about, these families, they may be in a situation where, they're coming to this class for a reason, and there may be some abuse, whether it's an emotional or physical or mental abuse, that's going on. And so that's the first thing I think of with mental health, and I think that's something that we were trained on, especially online, about something we should be aware of and be, trying to observe as much as we can if there's anything like that. So
Good. So that was the perfect lead into my next question. And Rachel, since the mic is next passed to you, we'll ask you. How does that potentially tie in to the Stronger Families Project? What might that look like, and what would your role look like in the clinical realm?
So we're obviously going to be teaching these classes to families, and I think we're going to pick up on a little bit of the family dynamics that are going on. And also we're going to be close to these family members, and sometimes they might confide in us things that are going on in their family, whether it is abuse or like suicidal ideation, things like that. So I think our role is to make sure that they have the resources and the help that they need, the professional help, of course. For us as family coaches, I don't think it'll be so in depth, but we definitely want to get them to the right people.
Good. So we're going to stick with this row so the mic is singular to one piece of the room. Remind me of your name. Taylor. So I'm going to ask you, in your role with SFP, following up with what Rachel said, what does that bridge look like to go potentially, if there are deeper questions, maybe assessment that needs to be done on site? What potentially would that look like? And what is your role in potentially facilitating the bridge between a family coach in a classroom and then a social worker potentially getting involved?
I think the bridge, because as family coaches, we're not trained to do assessments or anything like that. So we just need to be able to have those relationships with those who are confiding in us and gain their trust, but also tell them, hey, you know what, thank you so much for talking to me and letting me know. I'm so sorry, but I have a friend who is trained or, has better understanding of this than I do. Let me get you to them and just kind of refer them off to the social workers.
Good. How about this? A follow-up to that then. How do you get to the point where you know that there is maybe a clinically underlying occurrence going on where you maybe need to bridge that gap? Maybe there's that gut instinct. So what do you then do? Are you able to ask questions? You guys have done the suicide training online, right? And maybe some of those conversations to have or what that might look like, but how specifically do you do that? And how in depth can you go?
I don't know. I personally don't feel like I could go into depth about it. I don't know if that's just something we refer off to the social workers.
Good. This is perfect. Yeah.
Oh, I was just thinking, asking them if they're safe, if they feel like they're safe, and then, going directly to the social workers after that conversation with them. That's usually what you want to first do with somebody who's talking about suicide, is asking if they're safe.
Good. So, and we're going to hand it off to Bryce really quickly. Bryce, I'm going to give you the hard one. The hard question. I'm going to give you a scenario that has happened the last 2 years at SFP on site in a classroom with the family coach, right? So site coordinator didn't necessarily become involved until long after the fact, but at that point it was more potential like crisis intervention, which is where the suicide screen and the training you guys had online came in. This is more what do we do and what does the clinical piece look like for you, right? There is an individual, I'm going to turn my back to the camera, there's an individual underneath a desk in the back of the classroom, right? They have a plastic knife or a fork, and they don't much want to participate, wherein they're underneath and they're just sawing on their arm One case there was a little bit of blood, the other there wasn't. What the heck do you do? There is a class full of adolescents. You have your radios, but the site coordinators and the clinical coordinators and the MSWs have the radios. Nobody has come to check in yet. What do you do as a coach?
Excellent question. I think what I would want to do is I would want to make sure that all the other students are okay and that they're not kind of escalating the situation, because if I show that it's a big deal for me, I feel like they'll feed off my emotional energy and then it'll be a big deal for everyone else. So what I would do is I would ask them a question, I'd have them pair up and just kind of talk in groups and kind of mull over the question while that's going on. I'd be like, okay guys, you think about that, and then I'd walk around and I'd kind of crouch down and I'd probably just start a conversation, a dialogue with the person who's trying to hurt themselves and just kind of ask why they're doing it, what's going on here. I'd basically be trying to buy time until someone else came into the classroom, and then we could work it out from there.
Good.
I don't know if that's what you're looking for.
That's exactly what we're looking for. Wherein there are two of you in the classroom. So do we always have to have at least one coach in the classroom at any given point in time? Yeah, we can never leave them unattended, line of sight. So if there are two of you, if your attention is purely diverted to this individual, what are we going to do with the rest of the class if another coach has to potentially go and grab somebody else to bridge the gap between them and then the MSW? How do we do that?
That's a great question. I think the only thing I could really think of is just like kind of kick the ball back in their court and just kind of like ask them some questions that they can mull over and talk about themselves, just to make sure that I'm with that person. Or maybe if there's a lot of trust in the room, and maybe say if the person underneath the desk has trust with someone else in the room, maybe enlist their help. Say, hey, Stephen, could you help me with Billy? He's kind of cutting himself, and I just want to make sure that he's okay. And then maybe use positive peer pressure in that sense to make sure that that guy feels supported and that he's not worried about, I don't know, I can imagine if you're cutting up your arm, something else is going on that is not necessarily related to cutting the arm. So maybe if we get him to talk, open dialogue with him, and then maybe things will work out. So.
Good. What do you think? This side of the room, everybody agree for the most part? Okay, that's why we're going to do a clinical training today. And more specifically, we have to understand the rates of occurrence, what that looks like for children, adolescents, and adults. And then we have to understand, again, this isn't the suicide training again. This is, well, what is the next step to that, and what specifically does this look like for us? And so that's what we're going to talk about today, right? So good participation thus far, and really good answers. I'm impressed, as a matter of fact. This is a good session to be recording, right? So having said that, I want to run through a couple of really quick slides, because this is important for us to understand as educators. Specifically, when you look at NAMI, everybody familiar with NAMI? Yeah? They are the foremost. It's a nonprofit that works with really trying to destigmatize mental illness, bring community resources together, and work with individuals. Is NAMI, the Utah chapter of NAMI, are they a resource, and are they a potential community partner with SFP? Without a question, right? Which is why we're showing the NAMI stats. But when you look at mental health and just the clinical piece of children and teens right now, what % of individuals across the United States are living with a mental illness? You guys see the top left corner right here? That's a pretty significant number between the ages of what? 13 and 18, right? Fairly significant. And what impact does that potentially have? 50% of all lifetime cases, it could be depression, anxiety, a bipolar disorder, some type of mental illness. You guys, it began at the age of 14. 75% began by 24. So when we look at what this program and our participants potentially might be engaging with underneath the surface as educators and community educators, do we need to be aware of these statistics? Ladies and gentlemen, out of 5 folks in your room, one of them is potentially struggling with some type of mental illness, right? Therefore, as we approach the semester and as we approach the program and our preparations with teaching or site coordination, whatever that's going to look like, we need to understand that there is risk walking around. And I don't mean to put risk on someone's head. its risk if we're not able to identify, ask the right types of questions, and ensure safety at our program, right? Having said that, when you look at mental health facts in America in general, again, it's the same thing. 20% of adults are experiencing a mental illness across their lifespan. 1 in 25 have a serious mental illness. What's the difference between mental illness and then a significant mental illness, a moderate to severe presentation? Bryce?
Just a guess. I'm guessing mental illness is something that affects them, but a severe mental illness is something that directly impedes their day-to-day living.
I mean, I couldn't give a better answer. That's exactly it, right? The level of function is absolutely being hindered, right? And that's why the last slide that we're going to go through, I call it the trifecta of questioning. We're going to understand the types of questions, and then we're going to talk about a really basic CBT, cognitive behavioral model for being able to understand the way that our thoughts and our emotions impact behavior, because the behavior or the outcome behavior is typically where you're seeing that decreased functionality, right? And that's what's important for us to understand, and the specific types of behaviors that maybe we pay attention to. And if we see those types of behaviors, understanding the types of questions to ask. And it doesn't mean that we want to give anybody a label, right? Are we ever saying, you look like you're really depressed, or you definitely are clinically depressed? No, right? But what we're going to do is be very well aware of it, and it's potentially a topic for discussion, especially like in teen group and working with our teenagers and parents too. When it comes to family life education, there's a lot of research out there that shows the benefits of just being able to facilitate this conversation in a classroom setting if that's what's being presented, right? The right-hand side, more importantly, LGBTQ 2 times more likely to present, right? So if you have a same-sex partnership, children that are reporting that they're bisexual, gay, lesbian, whatever that looks like, you know that there potentially is a 2 to 3 times more likelihood of an incidence of mental illness. So we just need to be aware of that. Again, we're not labeling anybody, but it's us being open to understand this may be present in the classroom. And we have a responsibility to at least be able to identify it. And again, this isn't suicide training. I know that everybody's somewhat familiar with this, but when you look at suicidality, whether it's attempt or completion, is it fairly high in the state of Utah? Yeah, we're ranked 5th in the country as of last year, right? And when you look at those that are potentially more likely to engage in the behavior or in suicidal ideation being present or self-harm behaviors, we know that the LGBT community is more than 2.5 times more likely to, again, present or express those types of thoughts or having engaged in those behaviors. So the clinical piece to SFP, we are finding it's important. Does anybody remember from the online trainings, how many incidences did we have last year alone between fall and spring? Do we remember? And this was an actual DCFS report, a wellness check with the police. By the way, all the wellness checks that we did, an individual was removed from the home for safety, either for themselves or for others. How many did we have last year? Anybody remember? 12. So how many sites do we have this semester? And if we were to multiply that across the plane, we have 10. So that means potentially or statistically might every site experience or encounter some type of clinical presentation. Yeah, which is why we're going through this and why coaches and education coordinators really need to understand what we're talking about, right? And we won't go into this slide much. I just wanted to show it so that everybody's fairly aware. But when you look at health conditions, when you look at the way that mental illness, again, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, psychotic disorders, delusional disorders, all of these types of things, how do they potentially present? Because with FAMS, we love to look at things from a systemic perspective, right? This is systemically how it's impacting us. So you might hear of relational problems within the marriage. It might be marriage conflict, but realistically speaking, they're not going to report that it's mental illness. They're just reporting that there is some type of conflict or problem going on. It can be not just between the partnership, but it could also be parent-child, right? You look at substance use, 28% are presenting with some type of substance use behavior, job or school issues, lack of grades, not going to class, problems with housing. That's definitely something that we see with SFP that our social workers work with. Psychosomatic symptomology. What the heck does that mean? Somatic symptomology. I'm going to go to this side of the room. Anybody know? What is somatic symptomology? Is anybody in practice this semester? I don't think so.
I'm not in practice, but I
Okay.
think I know.
Okay, what is it? Oh yeah, microphone. We got to Oprah this.
Yeah.
Yes.
But psychosomatic symptoms are like when something's going on in your head, for example, like a mental health condition, and it presents itself in your body, like for example, like headaches, stuff like that. Is that?
That's exactly
yeah?
it. Migraines are typically something that you hear, chronic and acute headaches. That was good, Rachel. Lower back pain, GI distress, so gastrointestinal issues, right? Upset tummy, not wanting to eat, painful, chronic fatigue, right? So achy joints and muscles, lethargy, maybe not having the energy to do what you want to do, lack of sleep, inability to sleep, trouble waking up, stuff like that, right? So if we hear that any of the individuals in our class are potentially presenting with that, is it something that we want to pay attention to? Absolutely. Because again, what percent of adolescents across the country, if we were to just scoreboard it, are presenting with mental illness? 20% or 1 in 5, right? So every one of us is going to work with somebody this semester with that. So having said, there's a trifecta of exploration, and I really, really like to talk about this before we get in to more of the types of questions, how it presents, and then what we do about it, right? The clinical piece. So, frequency, duration, and severity. How many of you remember that from the online training? Okay, so talk to us a little bit about what frequency looks like. What potentially might that look like if you were going to ask questions, or what types of things would you want to know based on a hypothetical?
So just asking how often it's happening. You know, is it daily? Is it weekly? It's kind of like, I think of the PHQ-9 almost. You know, within the last 2 weeks, how often have you experienced these feelings?
That's exactly it. And you can just keep the Oprah mic. How about duration? How do you potentially quantify duration?
Just like from when it begins to, I don't know. I think from like beginning to end. So is it something that's happening all day? Is it just for an hour? I think that's kind of, is that what duration?
This is why we're talking about it, right? Because this stuff is important. And as the frontline conversationalist and assessor, yeah, so frequency, how long has it happened? Or I'm sorry, how often does it happen? Is it happening daily, multiple times a day? Is it just constant? And then duration is going to be how long has this been going on? Okay, how long has it been going on, and when was the first time that you remember experiencing this? And could this potentially roll into like grief and loss if somebody has just lost a grandparent, a sibling, or something like that? Yeah, you want to know, okay, so since the incident, or it could have been before the individual passed away, when was the first time that you remember experiencing X, Y, and Z? How long have you been experiencing it? How many times a day have you been experiencing it? And then severity is the last tier to that, and that is on a scale of 1 to 10, how acute is it? How potent and powerful or overwhelming is that? 10 being really high. It is overwhelming, I can't think, it is difficult to focus on anything else. That's how bad whatever symptom they potentially are discussing is. And then 1, basically none at all, right? Yeah, Bryce.
Is this specifically with suicide awareness, or is this with any type of mental?
Any type of mental illness. That's a
Okay.
great question. Yeah. And does it even have to be mental illness? No, if somebody's saying that they're being bullied, you potentially want to tier that. How often are you being bullied? How many times a day? How long has it been going on at this level? And then when did it start? Does that make sense? And then you're going to ask, how significant? I mean, how impactful is that bullying when it's potentially going on? Good. So I'm going to put this side of the room. Bryce, I'm going to take the Oprah mic from you. And we are going to put this side of the room on the hot seat. And you look really excited, so I'm going to give it to you. And remind me of your name. Elizabeth. Let's pretend that you are a 15-year-old student that is attending the American Fork Junior High site, okay? And your parents have been fighting quite a bit. Schoolwork's been kind of tough because you can't really get your schoolwork done. And even more than that, I mean, you're just tired. You're not sleeping at night. You're constantly worried that something's going on with them. But as we know, do children like to potentially internalize it? Yeah, they're very egocentric, right? So they typically think if parents are fighting, it's because of me, or if they divorce, it's because of me. So Elizabeth gets to be the 15-year-old, and for state of fact with the camera, please state your name. McKinley gets to be our family coach. And what you want to do, Elizabeth, think of something that might be impactful if there's a lot of conflict in the home, schoolwork's not getting done. It could be grades, it could be decrease. Let's say you play sports and you're not really performing, you don't want to go to practice. You can make something up. And then McKinley is going to model for us how to measure frequency, duration, and severity of whatever trait or symptom that you're reporting. Okay, here we go.
So how are you doing? I'm not doing very good. I don't want to socialize with my family. I spend all day in my room playing video games or just laying down on my bed. I don't want to go out to eat, and I'm just not doing very good.
Okay, so time out really quick, don't be mad. Is this potentially indicative of some type of pathology? Pathology meaning maybe mental illness. Yeah, I mean, she just named numerous of the criterion, right? Okay.
I'm so sorry. So how, are you in all day and you're in bed, in your room? Yes, I've skipped school several days of the week, and when my parents are working, they don't know. But yes, it's quite often. And do you remember when it started? Has it been a few weeks, a few days, a few years? I would say it has been happening for the last couple of months. It's been always present, but not as bad as it has gotten now. Okay, so you're saying that it progressed from a few months ago and then it's gotten worse? And right now, how are you feeling, on a scale of 1 to 10? Yes, I would say it has gotten worse. Right now, I would say about a 9. Yes.
Okay, that's pretty high. So let's take a time out. We just talked about not wanting to get out of bed or spending more time in bed, potentially missing school, right? Is this realistic? Yeah, for sure. Every single site at some point in one of their classrooms is going to have this exact type of conversation, right? And again, this is more about just understanding how to approach it. So, this side of the room, Westsiders. With what was just disclosed and with Sydney being on pause right now, what do you want to know? That's some really good information, right? Where do we go with this now? Good, so you want to know the why. What was it that potentially exacerbated this behavior, no matter what it would be? Yeah. Good.
So her name's McKinley.
McKinley, what did I say?
Sydney. Well, that's okay.
You look like a Sydney I had last fall, my bad. McKinley, I know your name. You've taken my classes too, sorry. Okay, time in, here we go.
Alrighty, so this happened a few months ago. Do you remember any event that may have triggered it, or have you experienced any of these feelings in the past?
Beautiful. You guys notice how she said the past? That was a perfect tie-in. That was a great question. Really good job.
Yes, it has happened in the past. My parents have always had money issues, and my dad was laid off a couple of months ago, and I believe that's what it is.
Okay.
So you're feeling the stress of your family's money issues, and you're really sad for your father that he lost his job. And so how's this, why do you think it's affecting you? I believe it's affecting me because they are always arguing about money, about where they're going to get the money to buy food or pay for school supplies. And since it's school related, I feel like it's my fault or directly affecting me.
Good, okay, time out. Was there empathy shown there? Yeah, was that a pretty good job?
Yeah.
In parentheses, clapping, right? Closed caption, I mean. Yeah, that was really good. Is that pretty basic with being able to ask questions? Yes, that's all it takes. This is the one thing that I want to reiterate from the suicide training. Is this about suicide today? No, it's about being able to just have a general conversation and knowing how to have that conversation, right? More importantly, we need to be able to assess and really work in whether there needs to be follow-up. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all it takes right there. Basic. And so I love how you were able to restate it. That's called a mirroring or a clarifying statement, so she can hear what you just said. And then you asked, is that along the lines, or did I hear you correctly, yada, yada, yada. More importantly, if you were to follow up, she could follow up with, if you were going to tie the suicide training into this, into what? What's the question you would ask? And you want to be direct. You want to be very gentle, but you want to be direct. You don't want to skirt around it. You have to be able to go straight through, right? So what's the question that we want to ask? What do you guys think? Bryce?
Have you had any thoughts of suicide?
There you go. And have you had thoughts of suicide, right? So this is the one question that I want to follow up with Bryce. From the training that you guys did, are you able to administer a very general Columbia suicide screener? You are, right? You don't have to have a master's degree to assess that. And is that one of the first questions you ask? Bryce, that's a perfect lead-in. That's exactly it. Have you had thoughts of maybe not wanting to wake up, or thoughts of potentially wanting to die or hurt yourself, right? Whatever that looks like with whatever the port. I might say, okay, I really appreciate you sharing that. Have you ever had thoughts about potentially either not wanting to wake up, or wanting to hurt yourself, or wanting to die, right? And if you cover those three, that's typically the three that I have found professionally, that's the inlet into that conversation. And if she says yes, do you guys want to just drop the ball? Like, boom, mic drop, I'm terrified, not my spot, I'm leaving. Somebody else with more skills and can handle liability can take over. You want to collect all the information you can, because typically, if it hasn't been discussed, you're that front line to have the rapport with you, and you want to collect every piece of data, and then you want to let your other family coach know we probably need to get an MSW. So when they come in and check in on every single classroom every single week, we need to let them know, hey, let's have a conversation. And then you can segue into that based on the suicide training. Good. So clinically, ladies and gentlemen, are the three questions that difficult to ask? If you're teaching your class lesson, can you use the trifecta of expiration? Without a question, right? Yeah, frequency. Okay, so you have been working out, blah, 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 blah. How often do you work out? How much do you potentially kick your own butt in the gym? And when did you start working out, right? I mean, it's that easy. This is one of my favorite pieces when it comes to the clinical training. And I like this specific form just because there's so much information on it. Ladies and gentlemen, so this cognitive behavioral therapy. Again, can you potentially teach psychoeducation material in a classroom or with an individual that you just went through the trifecta of exploration with? You can, right? So we need to understand, clinically speaking, at where we are in our academic and professional development, that this is completely okay for you guys to use. You're not going to go in psychodynamically or start clinically processing things, but you got to understand that usually in our lives, an event happens. And once this event happens, it's going to trigger some type of thought, some type of emotion. And once the thought and the emotion are triggered, there's most often going to be a behavioral response, okay? What might this potentially look like in the classroom? I mean, it's exponential, right? But the most important piece is something typically happens first. It could have happened at home. They could be really quiet and withdrawn in your classroom. It doesn't mean that you have done something. It could be that something was triggered and they are in protection mode, right? Or maybe they have anxiety. Something occurred. Finance issues at home. Maybe there's more anxiety. The kid's messing around more, not paying attention, very distracting behavior. Do we get frustrated with it? Yeah, sure. But as educators, we need to understand most likely there was a triggering event that led whatever behavioral presentation that you're seeing. So having said that, I want to practice this a little bit. So when it comes to thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, we have to have the event in focus. Okay? So we're going to use the trifecta to be able to identify what the event was. And then we're going to ask them. This is just going deeper into the last slide, right? We're going to ask them, okay, when that happened, what thoughts did you have? What types of beliefs came to mind? What was going on in your head, right? the thoughts that we have in response to some type of event, do they always make sense? Do they always have to be really linear, make complete, concrete sense to the individual? They don't, right? You have loose associations, whatever that looks like. For example, if Stephanie, I'm teaching in a classroom, don't really notice she's there yet, blah, 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 and I look over and I see her with the blue pen, the binder, the black shirt, it might immediately elicit a thought of when I got busted in the 3rd grade for messing around with Johnny in the back of the class, and then I was sent out and then sent to the principal's office, right? Is that automatically going to be on the forefront of my mind as I'm up doing what I'm doing? It's not, right? But to the point that the emotion surfaces, and I notice there's an emotional change within me, am I aware that something's going on? But do I always have a concrete understanding of what it was that triggered it? And then emotionally, there's going to be behavior. I'm going to withdraw. I'm going to potentially get a little more frustrated, a little more animated, whatever that's going to look like, just what you'd see in human behavior, right? Helping our folks understand what was the event that activated the thought, and helping them identify the thought that potentially activated the emotion that then is resulting in the behavior that you're seeing is really important, okay? It's really, really important. So I'm going to have our Eastsiders practice this a little bit, because these guys have already talked a lot, right? So we're going to go to these ladies on the end over here, and for statement of fact, you can both state your name if you'd like for the camera, and we're going to practice putting you on the spot.
My name is Miranda.
I'm Gabriella.
Okay, Miranda and Gabriella, who wants to be the student in the classroom? Okay, Gabriella's like, I will definitely be the student, therefore throwing Miranda under the bus, which is perfect, right? So let's look at potentially you're in a lesson. Let's say lesson planning that you are in. Let's not do parent conflict because we already did that. You know what? Let's do bullying at school because that is something you'll talk about, right? And you notice that Gabriella has been really involved in the class, and all of a sudden she's now a little more withdrawn. You can notice that proximity-wise, she's even maybe spaced herself outside of that immediate ring of chairs, or tried to position herself outside of the circle of trust, right? How the heck are you going to potentially identify this with her and make her feel comfortable or allow her to feel comfortable in the classroom setting still? As a teacher, I'm giving you some hard stuff, but we're practicing this, right? Because we have to know how to do it. So you can also lean on lifelines from the Eastsiders or the Westsiders if you'd like. Okay, here we go. So go ahead and just make a statement of fact. So you're talking about bullying, and then maybe Miranda asks, has anybody ever been bullied or seen somebody bullied before? And then Gabriella, you can report X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, bullying really sucks. I hate it so much. I don't know why people do it. It's stupid.
And then, sorry, am I responding back to her?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just dialogue. So you're the teacher, and she is the participant in your class.
Okay, and I'm just going to go down the...
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So, Gabby, have you had an experience? Did something happen regarding bullying in your life?
There's a girl at school that's kind of mean to me sometimes.
Oh, okay.
And if you're comfortable,
Yeah.
would you share that with us? Or was there a recent experience that maybe you've had?
Okay, yeah. So do you mind sharing a recent experience you had with that and how you felt? Or how you feel?
Yeah, in the lunchroom she trips me and I fall over with my food, and she tells my friends not to sit with me at lunch, and I sit alone. And then I can see her kind of making snide comments in the halls when I walk by, and it just makes me feel bad.
I'm so sorry you're going through that, and that makes me really sad because you're such a nice person and nobody should be treating you like that. Gabby, do you feel like is there anything you do regarding bullying, or how do you cope with that?
Well, I don't really know what to do, so it just makes me feel bad, and she does all these things to me at school, but I don't know what to do about it.
Good. Okay, time out. So she just went for, when you look at the trifecta, she just went to duration and is there anything she does about it for the behavioral response piece, right? what could she ask or what could be done to potentially try to explore the thoughts? Because remember, this is psychoeducational material that you guys are teaching, and so this is directly along the lines of what you can be questioning and processing, right? Teaching. So what types of questions would you ask with the thoughts? How would you tie that in? So if there's bullying going on, she feels badly, what do we want to know? We know the emotions there, the behaviors there. How do we ask about the thoughts? Rachel, come over. Just. No, you're good. Yeah, do we have to make it super difficult? No, we don't have to grab our Freud cigar and a nice golf hat, right? Sit down with the Mr. Rogers scarf. No, we don't need to do that. Yeah, that's exactly it. So based on Rachel's feedback, try to apply that, Miranda. Just, yeah, what does that look like? Yeah. Yes.
So, Gabby, what are your thoughts when
What types of thoughts might you have when bullying's going on or right after? What types of thoughts are going through your mind?
So what type of thoughts go through your mind, Gabby, when, bullying is going on?
Well, when she's mean to me, sometimes I feel like I'm not good enough for her to be nice to me, or for her to tell other people to be nice to me. Makes me feel like, I'm not as cool as the other kids.
So she just explained feeling.
Perfect. Yeah. So do you think it might be productive to explore specific emotions? I won't pull the emotion chart up, but I mean, there are tons of emotions, right? Do we want to know which type of emotions? We do. The one thing I would recommend against or advise against would be implanting. Does anybody know what implanting means? What does it mean to implant? As an educator, as a social worker, a shrink, an MFT, it doesn't matter what we're doing. What is implanting? I'm going to come up with a little bit.
Just to guess, implanting is where it's kind of like Inception, where like
Yes.
they're telling you what's going on, and you're implanting. Oh, so you feel this way. Oh, so you hate your dad. When they had said nothing about that, instead of just listening and accepting what they're saying and then helping them to kind of uncover it themselves, you're shoving thoughts in there.
Yes. Yesterday morning, for example, the garbage man, I am walking out of the door to come teach at UVU, and the garbage truck, for whatever reason, decided to dump a ton of trash on the ground. And then there is a voice. This is just using your example. Your dad did it to you. You hate your father. I'm like, I do hate my dad. When really that wasn't the catalyst for it, right? It was the garbage being spilled. You guys, this happens all the time, right? So, by the way, shrink. I mean, good pre-material right here. This is good, and he's got some good examples. So when it comes to implanting, yeah, we want to make sure that we're not implanting. So maybe asking more, less guided, but more directed open-end questions, right? Bryce, again, good example. So Miranda, just one more time. Okay. We have the fourth wheel on the bus that still hasn't gotten you yet, so here we go. Yeah, so how she feels. Let's do how she feels. Try to explore that. And remember, there are lots of feelings or emotions out there. So try to solidify down what she's feeling.
Okay. So, Gabby, when you experienced this bullying, can you tell me, how is it that you feel?
I feel sad that she's bullying me, but I also feel angry because I don't feel like she should be doing that to me.
Perfect. And then how could you potentially quantify her behavioral response? What does she do in response to the thoughts she's having, the sadness, and the anger? Because that's that third leg of the triangle. So again, this is easy, you guys. Don't overthink it, but explore that with her.
So then I'm just going to go in detail,
So
why do
when you
feel
feel this way, what potentially do you do? What types of behaviors, or how do you respond to it? What do you do? And that's where you're looking for isolation, punching bag, lots of television watching, sleeping, whatever that might look like.
Okay, Gabby. So when you feel sad and you say you feel mad as well sometimes, what is it that you do when you feel that way?
Well, if I'm at school, I'll probably go sit alone. I'll just be sad by myself. But at home, I'll probably be really angry at my siblings and kind of be angry at them because someone bullied me, and I won't listen to my parents, and I probably won't participate in the stuff I like to do anymore.
You are so good. Nice. It was so articulate. Ladies, nice job. So So do you feel like we were able to get a decent landscape of that cognitive triangle, just trying to identify the event that happens, the thoughts that occur in response to it, the emotions, and then the behavioral piece, right? And again, are we most prone to recognize the thoughts or the emotions with anything in life? Which one do we identify most often first?
The emotions.
Why is it the emotions? To ask this again one more time. I'm going to pass this over to these folks because you've now had the mic for like 20 minutes. Thank you very much. Right? So why is it the emotions?
Because we've experienced those, we can understand those emotions. We might have experienced them. We can feel empathy for that person.
Good. Yeah, that's exactly it. So part of this psychoeducational piece with our lessons, is this really that difficult to have or hold a straight 60-minute class if you have 3 to 6 participants teaching any given lesson any given day? Is there way more clinical approach than what we potentially may have thought about, right? I mean, this is CBT, not processing stuff from the back. We're not processing trauma. We're not processing abuse. It's also going to help us clarify whether there is a need for further follow-up, right? And so with bullying, for example, an individual that bullies, we have had several at SFP that are potentially the labeled bully in the classroom, the behavioral disruptor, realistically the aggressive one at school, not doing homework, very, very behaviorally defiant at home. What do we want to look for? Instead of just getting frustrated with them or trying to tell parents like, you need to spank them and discipline, what really might we need to be looking at? Events that are going on maybe at school that's causing the aggression, or maybe the parents are interacting with the child and the child feels bullied and so they don't know what to do with it. They're now at 150%, so they have to pop their top. There has to be some type of cathartic release while they're at school, right? So that's the basics. So let me ask you, in general, what is CBT and what is the cognitive triangle and how can you apply it in the here and now in a psychoeducational environment like SFP? I've already said it like 20 times, but I just want to re-solidify. Because this stuff, a lot of times, again, we take these concepts and they're way out here, but they are so incredibly useful right here.
I think just apply what we've learned. So ask those type of questions, the frequency, the duration, talk about the events, the thoughts, the emotions behind it. Yeah, it's not that hard. I think sometimes we think about it like from a big level, like, oh my gosh, they're going to commit suicide right now, or like something crazy is going to happen. We have to like get them to an MSW. But really, it's just talking about, going deeper, just talking about their feelings, talking about the emotions behind it, and
Yes.
that.
Good. Bryce.
One thing I really like about this is just the fact that you were saying you don't have to use fancy language. Sometimes I feel like if I'm trying to help someone, they can't know that I'm trying to help them type thing. Like I have to be sneaky about it. But in reality, I can just ask them straight up like, oh, what kind of feelings do you have when you feel like you're bullied? Or how do you self-medicate? Or that type of thing. Just be straight up with them and be authentic and just say like, that sounds rough. I don't know. I just thought it was very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and it is absolutely mind-blowing how hearing somebody, again, even if you're the aggressor and you're angry, having somebody simply just hear you and have that authentic, you know what, that seems or that would be a really difficult experience right now. Man, that's got to be hard for you. And you know what? I'm here to walk next side by side with you and let's try to figure some things out. Let's use the class to support with what you need, right? The last thing I want to point out, so screeners, right? We're going to see this, and you guys will get a training on the last block right after lunch with what we're doing research-wise. A lot of this discussion today is why we are going to start to implement, and we're really going to try to figure out what are our participants presenting with below the surface before they even come into the program, and then what are those outcomes, right? How do they improve intrapersonally inside and interpersonally with other people and socially, right? When we look at using words specifically with adolescents or parents or younger kids, do you guys know what they recommend? Reading language, what you should write material, or the speech and the dialogue that you're using, what reading level should it be at? Because Bryce, you bring up a really good point right there. They have to be able to understand you. What do you guys think?
Well, I'm guessing their reading level. Like, you don't want to use technical jargon, and you don't want to be like overly casual, but you want to be able to communicate effectively and communicate at what they want. Like, if they need someone who's a little bit more relaxed, just relax and take some time with them. Or if they want like an actual clinical definition, then whip it out.
Absolutely. The recommendation, their language. Do you know what their language is for most people? A 6th grade reading level. So if we are using jargon, we got to keep it to the point that a 6th grader eating cornflakes or whatever cereal 6th graders eat, you could sit at a breakfast or the lunch table and eat pizza and French fries, because that's what they love, and have just a basic conversation, right? Yeah, so we've got to make sure that we keep our speech appropriate. Here, I'll use a little jargon with you guys, right? But in the community, not at all, okay? Yeah.
How do we know, like, if we're talking with the class, how do we know if a participant brings something up to, like, keep talking about it with everyone, or if it's like a private conversation we should be having?
That's a really good question. Peer panel, what do you think? Yeah, Rachel.
I think if you're talking about it with everybody, stay away from content type stuff and talk more about like emotions that everybody can relate to. And then if you feel like someone's maybe going deeper or they're struggling with it, I would definitely talk with them one-on-one about it.
Yes, that's exactly it. So just think, if you were in a group education, a psychoeducation setting, typically going off with what Rachel said, it's the skills that are important. The thoughts are good, the emotions good, not too deep, and then the behavioral reaction. But once you start getting information that is getting to why or what, specifically past experience, that's when you're like, okay, this is definitely not a conversation to process here. I do need to collect the information and data so I know. And then again, guys, can you make recommendations to MSWs for therapy? Yes. Are you informing, with this discussion and this construct that we're talking about today, are you informing potentially some underlying components of a home visit? Yeah, without a doubt, right? So this is really important stuff for you guys to be doing. So having said that, any further questions? I know we're almost to the next breakout. We good? Was that helpful a little bit? Just to kind of add on to that suicide discussion, but then look at some frameworks to use in the classroom? Okay.
Yeah.
Nice work, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah.